good to be in Livingston again. I only come to church every year or two, but it's wonderful. I feel motivated to tell you a little story. I wasn't planning on it, but I heard that you were having communion next Sabbath. And from my experience, I find that when communion comes along, I've seen people walk into church, they see it's communion, and they walk back out again because, well, why do we do that? They don't understand. Well, I had an experience that opened my eyes, and I'm going to tell you a little story about that because I want to let you draw your conclusions. I was in Brooks Point, and I received a phone call from a lady that we vaguely know her, but we don't see her very often. She's an independent missionary and very poor. And anyway, she said, we have this church we're starting. We want you to come out and officiate at a communion service. Well, I'd never been to the church before, so I didn't know exactly what I was getting into. I said, well, is it a Palawano church? She said, yes, it is. And I thought, okay, well, I speak Palawano, so okay, I agreed to go. Although I was still a little bit uncertain because I don't like to go places when I don't have any idea of what's going on. But I said, just send me the instructions on how to get there because it was an area I had not been in. And so they sent these rather vague instructions. And so Sabbath morning, we leave to go to church there, and I already feel rather uncomfortable. We drive on out to the town, and right from the start, it became obvious these instructions were just not going to work. We drove through town, we drove back, we made calls, we finally got on a dirt road and started out, and everywhere we went, we'd have to stop and ask directions. And the road kept getting worse and worse and worse until we were thankful we had four-wheel drive. And by this time, we had wasted so much time, it was like 10:30 or 11 o'clock. And so I was feeling, put this all together, and I was thinking, this just is not working very well. So we arrive at the church, what we think is the church, and we stop there, and here's a building. It's not really a building. It's 3 walls with a roof over it. One wall has never been finished. The floor is just a bunch of broken concrete, and people are sitting on old boards and things like that. And they're very happy to see us. Okay, that's good. And we walk in, and it's like, okay, you take over. Well, we're not even sure where they are, so very good. We very quickly, Leonda gets up and tells a story or something along that line. I forget. And then I think, okay, I'll give a short explanation about communion because they had never had communion before. They didn't know anything about it. And so I get up and I think, okay, I'm going to start out real simple. I'm going to have to test these people to see where they are. So the first question I ask is, who was the first person that lived on the earth? No answers. No answers at all. And so I tried to give a little prompt, and it's just silence. And finally somebody says, oh, the Palawano they speak is a different Palawano than you speak. Now, how do you like to be standing in front to give a sermon and you know that the people don't understand what you're saying? I was feeling more and more uncomfortable, especially, would you want to explain the communion service when it's another language? Well, I quickly shifted gears and I realized they understand a little bit of what I say, so I'll tell a Bible story, because if they know a Bible story, usually if you don't know language too well, but you know the Bible story, you can sort of carry on. So I told that, and I sort of made my way through that. And then it was time for the foot washing. And I just said, okay, it's time for the foot washing. I wasn't able to explain anything there. So we leave this 3 walls, and we walk up to this decrepit building that's made out of, it has a nipa, sort of a nipa hut made out of bamboo, and the stairway up to it is rotted away and fallen down. But we go around behind, and there's a door there. We go in, and it's a bamboo floor, but you have to watch where you step, otherwise you're going to fall through the floor. and we all come up, and the missionary that is there, they bring up some basins and some water, and now what am I supposed to say? So I don't even remember. I didn't say very much, but I thought, okay, all we can do is do an example. And at this point, I just said, hey, God, this is way over my head. I don't know. If anything happens here good, it's going to be you doing it, because I am totally out of my element. I don't know what's going on. They don't know what's going on. We'll just do what we know to do, and we'll leave the rest to you. And so we go and we wash each other's feet, and they sit there watching us. And finally, we say, okay, go ahead. And they just sit there, and finally somebody gets up, and he goes over and he whispers something to somebody else. Then he goes over and whispers something to someone else. He goes around and does this, and I'm saying, okay, is this... And finally somebody comes up, and they get a thing of water, and they start washing each other's feet. And I just sitting there going, okay, well, you're in control, God. I am certainly not in control. We get that all done. We walk back down to the other building, and they, have the bread and the wine. But as they're doing this one individual stands up, and I didn't catch it, but I was told later, he says, this is absolutely awesome. That what they were doing when they was whispering to each other, they were confessing their sins, and they said, this is the first time I've ever felt totally forgiven for what I've done. And at that moment, I realized more fully than ever before, the communion service, even though we may not understand it, there's power there. Because I can guarantee you, it was not my doing that anything happened there. I mean, I was totally out of my element. But the thing is that when God says do it, whether it makes sense to us or not, do it. He has a reason for it. And concentrate on that. Because he understands. We don't always understand. So from that day on, I've seen communion in a totally different light. And I hopefully, by listening to that story, you can say, wow, maybe there's more to it than I actually realize. Anyway, that's my word of encouragement. In the Bible, there's two creation stories. It begins in the beginning. Where is that found? Where else? John 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is a story of two creation stories. God created this world in 7 days. That didn't take a lot of time for him to do that. But the other story that began at the same time was a bigger creation story than most of us realize. It was the creation story of a universe without sin throughout the ceaseless ages. Because that's what John 1:1 is all about. It's about God creating a universe free of sin. But you know what? In that creation story, it takes a week to do it. But a week in each day is 1,000 years. 1,000 years to create the universe without sin. And what's interesting, in Genesis it says, and God created light, and he separated the light from the darkness. But in the second creation story, he's doing the same thing, separating the light from the darkness. And when you look at it, it's interesting to note that from creation, and in the Bible, it gives you all of this written right there in the genealogies that you think are so boring and everything. It has the ages, it has everything from creation to the flood, where everything went wrong with the world. Everything went backwards. Everything was a total disaster. The flood wiped everything out. And then you have the call of Abraham. If you add up all those numbers, 2,019 years. Some people estimate it as 1,995 years, but just about 2,000 years, God called Abraham to set up a new system. The beginning of the Jewish nation. And for 2,000 more years, he worked with that system, and guess what? As usual, after 2,000 years, what happens? The whole thing falls apart. Jesus returns, and how do they treat him? They not only reject him, they kill him. Total disaster, 2,000 years. But you know what? Out of the ashes of the Jewish nation came forth a new institution, the church. And the church was God's instrument that he has used. And how many years have passed? In the year 2033, it will be 2,000 years since Jesus died on the cross. We are in the last days, aren't we? But the thing is that when Jesus comes, then we have 1,000 more years, the Sabbath, in which we celebrate the Sabbath year. We celebrate the creation of a universe without sin. You see, for God, it's not so much getting rid of the sin. He could have gotten rid of sin like that. But for God, it was the process which he used to get rid of sin, so that sin will never again arise. When Jesus died on the cross, that was the ultimate, the most incredible occurrence that has or will ever happen in this universe. That is the defining point. But the amazing thing is, we are a part of that story. We hold we're here doing our daily work, hassling with the daily hassles, doing all these different things, just thinking, well, I'm just a person here. But we are a crucial part of that story. God is there saying, I want you. You're serving a greater purpose because we, when it's all said and done, we will be the witnesses. We have seen it firsthand. We know what sin is all about. We will be his ambassadors throughout the ceaseless ages. It's sort of like if somebody's saying, well, you know about those people who live there in Tennessee. All those Tennessee people, they're like this and this and every, yeah, I know what you... And then I say, hey, I happen to live in Tennessee, and this is what I observed. When you can say, I lived there, I saw it with my own eyes, that makes a difference. Because everybody else has opinions. But if you were there, and you say, I've been there and I've seen it, they really don't have much to say. But we are in a position we can say, we were there. We know what sin is all about. We know it. We are the ambassadors. We are the witnesses to say, we do not ever want to see that ever happen again. And we will occupy a position higher than the angels. Not that we're saying, wow, look at me, I'm higher than the angels or anything, but because of the experience. And so every day we need to recognize that we're not just here making a living, driving to the doctor, the hospital, or to the grocery store. We are God's representatives right now at this moment. And as I began to realize that, I looked over my own life and realized that Ellen White says that our personal testimony is really one of the most powerful things we can give. And I know that as I look back on my life, I look back many years ago when I was living in California, and I'd go out running every day, and there would be a special place I would run to, and it was out in nature. There was no houses. It was just an area that nobody was around there. And I'd walk through there and I'd pray to God. And I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what God had planned. I just talked to him and say, what's the plan, God? How's it going to all work out? And you can talk to him about anything. Am I going to ever marry? Am I ever going to have a wife? But you know what? He brought me a wife. He brought me a wife that's willing to live and do the kind of work that God is calling us to do. He is incredible. And he's led us along. I remember eventually we come here I went to seminary. And, it was like a year before I ever went. It's sort of like God says, a change is taking place. We didn't know what the change was. We just get ready, close things off, finish things off. A whole year. And then all of a sudden he says, I want you to go to seminary. And that was not my plan. That was not what I wanted to do. I didn't like sitting in rooms listening to teachers and things like that, but that was God's plan. And he opened all the doors to get us there. And then after the seminary is through, well, where do I go now? This wasn't really exactly my plan here, but where do you want me to go? And I remember I went out to South Lake Tahoe to interview for a position out there. Well, I love the Sierra Nevadas. I love the mountains and everything. And I thought, wow, this is really awesome. This is something. And we interviewed, and I went back saying, well, let's just wait and see what they say. Well, they were there waiting and seeing what I said. And by the time we realized there had been a miscommunication, they'd hired somebody else. And so I ended up in Cookeville, Tennessee. Not exactly where I'd been planning to go. And I must admit there were times I said, God, why am I here? I don't know, not many of you were in the Cookeville church at that time, but there were challenges. It was 50% Southerners and 50% Yankees, and they'd forgotten the Civil War was over long ago. But, I say, God, why I don't have the talents to deal with this. He said, yeah, I know you may not have the talents, but I have things you need to learn. Because a lot of times God has to teach things, and sometimes the things we learn are not easy. And so he taught me a lot here. He took me to a place where it's hot during the summer, where it's humid. I didn't realize it was getting me accustomed to where I was going to be going. And then we went to the Philippines. And I have to say that when we first got there, the first 6 months, if we'd come up with a recipe for making it as uncomfortable as possible and everything going wrong, you couldn't have come up with a better scenario than we had. I mean, there was times when, if there'd been an airplane sitting there and they said, well, we're ready to fly you back, we would have been still sorely pressed in, the temptation to go back. When we went there, we had people saying, you're crazy, you're stupid. Taking your kids to a place like that? Rampant malaria, snakes, cobras, all that kind of stuff. Well, you're being irresponsible. You're being stupid. And we didn't really have an answer. I remember somebody said, why are you going to that God-forsaken place? Well, that's the reason why. And then when we realize we go up and these people we are dealing with are demon worshipers. And it's not only that they worship the demons, but they see the demons and that they get filled with the demons. Let me tell you, dealing with demoniacs is not a fun occupation. But I now have 30 years to look back on everything. And I say, was it worth it all? And a lot of times we get carried away talking about all the things that are wrong in this world. But in Mark 10:29 and 30, it says that if we're willing to give up our all for him, he will reward us. He says 100-fold in this world, and in addition, eternal life. And so I have 30 years to look back towards, and people say, why do you stay there for 30 years? That's crazy. Just rush over, baptize a bunch of people, and leave. That's all you need to do. Well, you know what we found out? When you have people who have been demon worshipers for generations, you can say a few words and you can dip them in the water and baptize them. You can make them look pretty good on the outside, but you have a lot of ingrained stuff you have not even dealt with in the past. And what we found out is that you have to do more than that. You have to, well, let's put it this way. In the Bible it says, go ye into all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Holy Ghost, Son and the Holy Ghost. And then what does it say? Teaching them to observe all ordinances. We can baptize, but sometimes teaching them is not just a theoretical thing. Sometimes teaching them is by the sermon we preach, by the life we live, is a far more powerful sermon than the words we say. And especially with the Palawanos, I found out that's exactly the way it is. You can tell them you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. They'll ignore it. But if I go and I do those things and they see that it works, they're going to start doing it. And so after that, those 30 years, I look back and I say, was it worth it all? And I look at Jillian, our adopted daughter. She was an orphan. Her father and mother both died her mother died shortly after birth. Her father died then. She disappeared for 2 years. We found out later, was a slave in the lowlands, was beaten, slept under the table with the dog, all this kind of stuff. We finally found her. We brought her back. And we thought, okay, we've solved the problem. And she then became a terror. She had no father, she had no mother, so she did as she pleased. And we said, we prayed, well, Lord, what do we do? And God said, adopt her. And we weren't sure that was the right thing, but we adopted her. And it was a challenge. We've had 4 of our own children, so that was a breeze. But Jillian was something else. She had a reactive attachment disorder, which basically is a person who has been let down so much and been hurt so badly that they no longer will trust anybody. They have to run the show. And I remember one time when I was talking to her, she said to me, do you know why I'm so rebellious? I said, no, Jillian. She said, I'm afraid to love you. And I thought that was quite perceptive, a 12-year-old. But anyway, she grew up. It all changed. She's now married. She has her own family. And in adopting her, it wasn't like we said, okay, Joan, we're going to get you because we want to baptize you and we want to make you into mission. That was the need, and so we filled the need. And the incredible thing is that she is now a missionary to another village, 5 hours hike into the mountains. She has saved the life of I don't know how many people. I asked her, Jillian, how's it going? She said, it's good. You know that guy that keeps killing people up here? He finally got sick and died. I said, well, how did you get along with him? She said, I got along with him okay, but yeah, he did kill 4 people. And then one of the children that Lonnie, who the parents were trying to kill Lonnie, and they didn't want to kill her outright because she had club feet, so she was worthless. So they were starving her to death. And she heard about it, and she got Lonnie. And she was in the hospital. Lonnie was in the hospital 30 days just to save her life. And now the plan is she is in the process of adopting. Her family is adopting Lonnie. Now, do you see what happened here? Is that we didn't tell Jillian to be a missionary. We didn't tell her to adopt somebody like we had adopted her. We didn't tell her any of those things. But she became what we were living, in a sense. It was just amazing, in that she is actually can present the gospel sometimes better than I can, because she understands that culture far better than I understand it. And then, of course, along with Jillian came Boobet, who was her sister. We never adopted her, but she's like our daughter. And then along with that came Delia, and along with that, Honey Bear. And then all of a sudden there's Moomal, and there's Nixon, and what we're finding out is that we have found it's like everybody there has become our family. It's like we are sort of their mentors, their parents, and I look back on the 30 years and I say, wow, I would have never guessed all the things that have happened. That it's just taken off, and I mean, with all of our mistakes and all the things we didn't understand and all the mumbling and stumbling and trying to learn new languages and everything, look at what's going on. There's people who are being changed, that are becoming true Christians. And so I look back and I say, do I have regrets? Yes, there's certain things I certainly would do different now that I understand the culture better. There's certain things I would have done in a different way. But the fact was that God was working. Just like in that story of the communion service, I was there conducting a communion. How much did I add? It was crucial for me to be there, but in a sense I added nothing. Do you understand? And that's what I'm saying to you, is that every single one of you, God has a plan. That you can make a greater impact than you can ever imagine. That you are players in the greatest drama that the universe will ever watch. And the problem is, we just live here, we see these things, we sort of fit in, and we forget that fact. We think that the important things are, the things that go on here, but those are sort of immaterial. It's like, I'm over there and I'm watching what's happening politically here, and I'm thinking that's important, and all of a sudden I realize, no, that's not important at all, because my citizenship is in heaven. We're already told what's going to happen to this world. We know what the story is going to be. But all I can say is, every single day you get up, you go to God, and you say, God, what is the plan today? And, people ask me, they say, well, tell me some of the miracle stories. Well, we have some pretty incredible miracle stories. But the miracle story that I find to be the most moving for me is the fact that God is there constantly, and no matter how small or how big your prayer is, he's always there to answer it. It's incredible to know that God is there. He's walking with you. If we listen to him, he will direct us. He will show us the way. That it's that multitude of small little miracles during the day that keep you guided and directed. Sometimes people say, well, your poor children, they grew up impoverished because they grew up in the jungle. I asked them, do you feel like you were shortchanged because you grew up in that environment? And their answer always is, no, we feel sorry for those who never had that experience. And the thing is, His ability to use us goes beyond our logic. It's like, what I find there is that He needs a combination of people. He needs us to be there. It's like each culture has their own temptations, weaknesses. And when you get different cultures together, each culture helps the other to be honest. What I've noticed is that when all of the culture, you just have one culture there, all of a sudden things sort of sink into what's in it for me. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. But if we keep the variety of cultures there, we keep each other more honest. I experienced this with Jillian, that even in our culture here in the United States, we feel like everything's good and wonderful. But when she came over here to the United States, here's a little girl. We went and visited one of our large churches there. We walked into it. It was empty at the time. Here's this little girl her mother died because she didn't have $1.50 worth of medicine, because nobody was there and nobody cared. She walks into this church and she walks up and she goes, "How much did this cost?" You know, that coming from her, it's a very much different question than if it was an American asking an American. Because she, in her mind, is thinking, wow, for $1.50, my mother can still be alive. But nobody really cared, did they? And that's one of the major reasons why it's good for us to get out of our culture, because as I come back here, I realize that the culture we're in has a far greater effect on us than we realize. Far greater. And it's important for us. When God said to go to the entire world, He said that for our good and for our benefit. And what I've found is the more that we give to Him, the more blessings He gives back to us. I think about heaven, and I tell the Palawanas, when I go to heaven, if there's no Palawanas there, that will be a very sad day for me. But I know there will be. And I found out how much it is when we were in Manila just a couple weeks ago with Jillian. We went to have the final interview for Lonnie for the adoption. The government has to interview and everything. And they interviewed Junie and Jillian, and then finally I came in. They said, "Do you have any questions?" And we said a few things, and then they popped a question for me. They said, "Do you love Lonnie?" You know, I wasn't expecting that question, and I went to answer it, and I couldn't. And the reason was I was so overcome with emotion, I couldn't say anything. And I realized that in giving myself, I'd come to truly love those people. And that's how love comes from. It comes from giving ourselves, the more we give, the more we care. It's not like we're here to boom, 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 we got one more, we got one more, we got one more. We're here to be servants. We're here to care about people. And that's what I like about your church, because I feel that you understand that. And the more we give of ourselves, the more we receive in return. And so, I just want to encourage you. Realize that you are players in a much larger drama than you realize. Don't give up. Keep following, asking God, what is it today? Be willing to sacrifice. Be willing to push yourself beyond your comfort zone. Be willing to do those things that, I don't know if I want to do them. I mean, don't do stupid things, just do stupid things. But to do those things that God is asking you to do. And he promises he will give 100-fold for all you had to leave behind. So I just want every one of you to realize you can be a part of that program. Follow him. He will reward. I think we have a closing song, but I don't know what number it is. What is it? 316.